Hey, welcome to Tradecraft Tuesday, where we expose hacker techniques that everyone can use for both for offense and defense. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Bisnett. This is my co-host, Kyle Hanselman.
Yo.
We try to be here every week, every Tuesday at noon. Most times it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You know, things come up. We have jobs, you have jobs. You know, we all get it, right? So we got some new things that are going on. Kyle, you want to talk about the Slack?
Alrighty, so this week, after community kind of tore us a new one for the last couple months, they said, hey, we want to ask live questions. You guys changed your platform to Hangout. How do we do it? Mubix, Rob Fuller, said, let's make this into a Slack community. So we now have a Slack community. On top of that, Slack communities are notorious for being impossible to invite. So we actually set up a convenient page on HamsterPad. It's available on our Twitter feed. That allows you to go to HamsterPad, ask for invite, and voila, you don't even have to wait for us to be able to invite you to it. Alternatively, you could DM us your email address, we could invite you, but HamsterPad is there for you, and the community's already blowing up. I think we got 50 people already joining. It's busy most days of the week. So please find us on there. And then, as always, you can continue to hit us up over Twitter. Hit us up with your feedback. Hey, what do you want to talk about? What would be beneficial? Maybe something you didn't understand. And more importantly, Slack allows you guys to be able to ask us live questions in the chat. So I'm sitting here looking at this webcam, but I'm also looking at the Slack page right here to answer your questions as we do it live.
Right over here. So if you you'll see me check it. So if you join Slack, the room is called pound or hashtag live, depending on how old you are. So if you have any questions, please jump in there, throw them in there. We'll try to get to them as they come up or at the end, whichever way fits in best. So we're on YouTube. I hope you guys like it. Yeah, on Cybrary. Definitely shout out to them, cybrary.it. If you guys like it, if it's working out for you, great. Go hit the subscribe button on YouTube. That kind of gives us some good feedback as to like who cares, who's listening. And there are some days when we're like really busy and we're like, should we really do it? So it helps when there's people out there who really care, and it gives us extra motivation to get in here and get it done. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the news. So we're going to try and report on this without being political in either direction, but the Democratic National Committee was hacked this week. You want to talk about that, Kyle?
Yeah, so this was an exciting one, right? And we actually bounced both ways. We had a handful of folks that said, please cover today's topic, and a handful of folks that said, cover the DNC compromise. Considering that the DNC compromise is heavily political, we decided we're going to step back, wait to see what happens. But as a high level, in case you're not familiar, this compromise happened. A lot of big name firms are throwing it out there saying, we're attributing this to Russia. One of those that was first on the scenes was CrowdStrike, and they specifically said, here's this malware Tradecraft. It looks like APT 28 and 29, or I think they call them Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear maybe. And they said, this is why we believe it's Russia. That, set aside, it clearly looks like attribution is a beast. So if you're not like compromising the source actors, like I don't know how you could possibly attribute this, but that's what it is. What's interesting about it though, is they annotated that this compromise once again appears to have happened back in summer of 2015. So breach detection being a big thing for Chris and I, this kind of hits the point home. You guys, whether you're at home as an offender or a defender, need to be on top of your Tradecraft. That way this 2-year, 1-year breach going undetected isn't happening in your corporate networks. So on top of that, Chris, I won't plug those breaches anymore, but it'll be really interesting to see what actually happens if we get more insider details. That's APT related, but I've heard all kinds of craziness with ransomware this week, heck, any month. You want to talk about the ransomware, what was it, JavaScript, right? RAA?
Yeah, so some new ransomware, they're calling it RAA. I don't know what that stands for, but instead of the usual, I guess, native application written in like C or C++ or whatever, the attackers went ahead and wrote this thing in JavaScript. In my opinion, ransomware has jumped the shark now. We've gone all the way to JavaScript. But it's delivered as an email attachment. and it uses Crypto.js with AES encryption. So Crypto.js has been around for a little while. It's been looked at by a bunch of people. It's probably secure. So assuming they're not using like some sort of hard-coded AES key or an AES key which can be computed by like running something on the computer, it's gonna be really hard to decrypt the stuff. So yeah, hopefully somebody comes up with some sort of solution. It also drops the password stealing Pony Trojan. Have you ever heard of this, Kyle? I'd never heard of this one.
Oh yeah. So Pony's made its way back and forth. I think we're starting to see more and more cyber criminals just literally starting to throw the whole gamut, whether it's ransomware that drops one variant or another, or now tying it with Pony. I think we're going to continue seeing this type of stuff. Why not throw everything at it? Steal your files, exfil everything, and then still have a rat on there, for later exfiltration later.
Right. Yeah. They're like, look, we're going to jump on here and we're going to hose all your files and we're going to hope that you pay us. But, if you don't, or even if you do, we still got your password. So now we're going to go try and hack your Gmail and hack everything else where you reuse the password. It's like, whew, just, they're looking at any way they can to monetize this stuff. So just look out.
So getting into today's topic, we blasted it all over the news. And just to reiterate, today's topic is on the DAO hack. So this has been touted anywhere from 150 million US to 40 million US. But the idea behind it is there was an organization called the DAO. We're going to get into that, what that means. And they were an alternative form of digital crypto to Bitcoin. A hacker found a feature, I will call it, and leveraged this feature to drain them of about 3 million Ether. And that's what translates to what we called $60 million in US dollars worth of digital capital. So that went down this week. And before we can even get into the actual technical implementation, the exploit itself, how it's happening, what's going to happen, we kind of probably need to take a step back, Chris, and say like, all right, what is this, what is Ethereum? What is the DAO? And explain that. So do you want to do that intro, Chris, or do you want me?
Yeah, I can take this. If you want to switch over, I got a screen share going on now.
Okay, I got you switched over.
All right. Okay, so for anybody not familiar, let's start in the very beginning. What is Ethereum? So Ethereum it's not another altcoin. Like some people try to compare it to like an altcoin off of Bitcoin. So that's not really the case, but they did use some of the techniques and ideas from Bitcoin. So one of the ideas that they borrowed from Bitcoin is the blockchain. And another lesser known thing that a lot of people didn't know actually existed in Bitcoin is for every transaction, there's actually a scripting language that gets run when the transaction is run, and it's run by the miners. So for Bitcoin, there's a bunch of different operations that you can do. It's kind of like its own, what would you call it? It's like an intermediate language where you can like have instructions to do things and calculate and run stuff.
Yeah, kind of like a domain-specific language, right?
Right, yeah. So like in Bitcoin, they have basically commented out all of the other instructions except for like a handful of instructions that you use to validate that the SHA hash matches and that the private key is valid. So some other people took that and tried to make what they call smart contracts out of it. And they tried to like re-enable those and make forks of Bitcoin, and none of them really ever took off. So the people behind Ethereum, they basically said, okay, let's borrow these, but let's not use Bitcoin. Let's write our own. And so they did, and they enabled this whole language they call Solidity. And what that allows you to do is write what they call a quote-unquote smart contract, which allows you to write a contract that is completely based on code. So if I wanted to set up a contract where I said, I will pay Kyle X amount of dollars when he, I don't know, posts a blog post, right? Like I could write code that would basically, when that blog post is posted, it would then automatically transfer the coins to Kyle. So I would basically escrow them on the Ethereum blockchain. When Kyle's done, they get transferred to him. That way he can verify that, like, yes, he will get the coins, that they already exist, that I have them, and there's no way for me to say, oh no, I don't actually want to pay you. So a little bit of background of how this works. So let's see. I hope everybody can see this. All right. So we start with the blockchain, right? So we have a bunch of different blocks. Ooh, that's really terrible drawing. We'll get through this. It'll be okay. So some of the blocks point back to other blocks. So this is how the blockchain works, right? We have a bunch of blocks. They have a hash. In the part of the block that's hashed, it points to the parent block. So as the way Ethereum works is in your block is your code. And so that code runs on the miner. They can subscribe to different events. And then the miners will call into this code and start running it. So that's kind of like a background of, I guess, how, what is Ethereum. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions, Kyle? Did I cover everything on Ethereum?
I mean, Ethereum is complex. I think the overall idea, it's a bunch of computers all running the Ethereum blockchain.
Right.
You know, people can exchange tokens for value called Ether. Right. It's super popular like Bitcoin. I think that's just fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, Ethereum was funded. They had like a funding event where the people who started it and said like, okay, we're selling Ether for this price. You can buy in. And a bunch of people bought in. I think they raised $160 million US dollars and sold out a bunch of Ethereum. In my opinion, a bunch of people jumped on it because they thought it might be the next Bitcoin or the next something like that. And they wanted to get in early before it gained in value so that they could use it like essentially as an investment. I don't know if there's really a whole lot of usability and interest in smart contracts, but you know, I could be wrong, and I guess we'll find out. You know, only history will tell. But so one of the things that Ethereum made possible was these distributed anonymous organizations, DAOs. So some unknown people then took it upon themselves to make a large one called the DAO. A bunch of people bought into that. And the point of it is it's kind of like an investment firm mashed up with Kickstarter. Okay, so you send money to the DAO by basically making a transaction. You make a contract, you send them money, and they give you back what are called tokens. And the tokens are only valid for the DAO, and they allow you to basically vote on what you want. So proposals are put in to say, oh, we should give X amount of Ether equivalent to so many dollars to such and such organization to do whatever. And so a proposal will go in, and then people vote on that proposal using the tokens that they got when they bought into the DAO.
So, Chris, you know, just kind of to drive this point home, I think a lot of people equate this or call this very similar to like venture investment. The idea behind it, you can buy into this DAO, throw your money, and you buy votes, and with those votes, you can turn around and choose to cast saying we should vote here, we should vote there. And the idea behind it is, you know, they can make money with this bad boy. What's interesting, we keep talking about DAO and then separately the DAO. So the DAO, as Chris mentioned, it's a, you know, probably the largest of all these, you know, decentralized, what is it? Anonymous organizations. I believe that's DAO what it stands for.
Yeah, it stands for Distributed Anonymous Organization.
Alrighty, so I'll flip it back over to your screen here real quick, Chris. We were looking a lot of whiteboard. And I think one of the points that we need to hit home, you know, we talked real quick in Chris's example about the blockchain and how some of this code gets executed upon transactions happening, or for instance, if a user wants to leave, you know, the DAO and take their funds or take their investment with them. It really comes down to that script that can get run is part of the, I guess, user input that went into this exploit that we're talking about today. Chris referred to them as smart contracts, and that's generally the accepted terms. But the idea behind them is they're a contract defined in code. So rather than having legalese, which spells out whether this is accepted or not, and you have to interpret this, this is a hard-coded standard that says here are the finite rules or the exact rules in this software contract, thus allowing anything that is not essentially denied is therefore allowed. Thus, the attacker found an edge case where he was allowed to transfer some of this money. Chris, do you want to jump before we actually get into the exploit code itself? Do you think there's any other pieces we need to hit to bring people back up to speed with what is, Ethereum, what is DAO, or what are smart contracts?
Yeah, I guess two things. So anybody can write one of these smart contracts. So the DAO has basically provided, and if you want to go take a look, it's on GitHub. You can go look at it. They wrote a smart contract, which is the basis of the DAO. So basically, there's no group of people behind the DAO that make decisions. They wrote a contract. That contract is immutable. It is on the Ethereum blockchain. And basically, people can interact with that contract. And so the way you interact with someone's contract is you write some code and you send tokens around, and you can call different functions in other people's contracts. So if you're really interested in kind of how this works, there's some examples on Ethereum for how you would do things like essentially like write a bank. So you would keep track of the balances for all of the people, and someone could deposit coins by calling a function which was deposit, and the balance would increase, or they could call a function which was withdraw, and their balance would decrease, and you would transfer out the tokens. And it's really pretty easy. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around because all of the code that's actually being run is not being run on your computer. It's being run in parallel on like a shared computing resource, which is all of the people who are running Ethereum. So it's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but looking at the examples might help you if you want to kind of like dive deeper on this.
Hey, Chris, can you switch your camera over? We're all looking at three little blocks. We don't get to see your shiny, beautiful face.
Oh, no one wants to look at me. It's fine.
Oh, dude, we do. We do.
All right. Okay. So the last thing before we kind of get into the attack is when you're part of the DAO, at some point you may want to get your money out, or at least some of it, and collect some of your reward. So reward is kind of like your return on your investment. And the way they do that is you split the DAO. So you create a contract that says, I want to basically get my money out, move my money over here. A bunch of people join it. It takes 7 days to mature. And then at the end of that, you can withdraw your money. And then you lose your tokens as part of your voting for the DAO, and you get your Ethereum back. And then you could transfer your Ethereum either into Bitcoin or into US dollars or any other currency through one of the exchanges that supports Bitcoin or Ethereum, sorry.
So Chris, I just posted, as we're getting closer to the exploitation, I just posted on our Twitter feed. I'm getting ready to paste the same darn thing into our Slack page right now. But there's 3 really solid blogs that go with it that talk about here's how this actual technical implementation of this exploit went down. I would encourage any of you guys to follow along. The video afterwards will provide this link. But this is the time in the video where it's probably worthwhile to actually find this blog that I posted called Analysis of the DAO Exploit.
Right. All right. So I'm going to switch back over to screen share so I can show you this. Okay. So this is the part of the code in the DAO code that really matters. And what you can see here is this first line. There's a method here called transfer, which you would think, the average person would think, this is where the actual transfer happens. No, that's not true. So in Solidity, capitalized functions that start with like things like a capital T, those are actually used for logging. So basically all they're doing here is logging that they are going to send the balance to message sender. And that's essentially whoever is requesting to extract their tokens. The actual work happens here in the withdraw reward for. Okay, so they call this function, which transfers the reward and the balance to message sender. And then after that, you can see down here that they reduce the total supply of coins in the DAO by how much they transferred out. And they set the balance of the user to 0 and the paid out amount to 0. So the problem here is that they send the coins before they set the balance to 0. So one of the tricky things with Ethereum is when you send coins or when you send your ether to someone, they essentially get to run a function to do whatever they want. And in this case, the attacker figured out that they could then recall back into the same function called split DAO and withdraw the rewards again. So if I scroll down here, this is essentially what it looks like. You can see here sort of at the bottom. Let me see if I can make the page a little bit longer. I can't really. I can do this though. Or maybe I can't. I'm terrible.
Man, those are some wicked paint skills there.
Terrible. Yeah, this is actually called Journal. It's like a whiteboarding for Linux. It works fairly well. Anyway, so you can see here the initial call to split DAO here at the top, then the call for withdraw reward for which we saw, which then calls into payout, and that actually transfers the Ethereum to the recipient, and then we see like the important part here, which is the recipient call value. So that allows the recipient to run a function, and they then again call split DAO, and withdraw reward for is run again. So the problem is the first call never returned to reduce the balance to 0. So when the second call comes in, it still sees that there's a balance and transfers that balance again to the user. And what the attacker did was just kept doing this. They just kept calling split DAO, which got their balance paid out a bunch of times. And there's some restrictions on the attack, which the attacker found really interesting ways to work around. Things such as there's something in Ethereum called gas, which it basically limits the runtime of transactions. And then there's also a call stack. So if anybody who's ever done programming before and tried recursive programming, you've inevitably run into, you filled the stack and you could no longer recurse anymore and your program probably stopped. So they do some things to get around that because Ethereum has the same thing.
That's kind of a great time to chime in there, Chris, and talk about why we're discussing this today. Like this hack, and stealing of boatloads of cash, that's nice and it's great for headlines. But the more important point here is kind of what Chris just was touching on. This is software developed by software engineers. A lot of thought was put into this on how do we define the most explicit way to handle these software contracts. And the reality is this was a design flaw or maybe a design feature. And kind of the point that we're trying to drive home here through the examples is, yes, this can happen. Here's how the exploit, the exploitable code was reached. But more importantly, for those that are either buying this as a company, not DAO specifically, or buying software engineering services, or those actually writing code themselves, need to be able to put their black hat on and think, how would a user who's less than, honorable, or maybe that has nothing to do with honor at all, maybe he just has the intent to use every feature that you allowed him to do. So I kind of wanted to drive that point home here real quick, that the whole example of this is to illustrate better code development practices, or being aware of what product you're either A, investing in, or B, using, paying for, deploying throughout your enterprise.
Yeah. I think this is pretty interesting. Not from the standpoint so much of smart contracts. Like I said before, I've never run into a situation where I was like, if I had a smart contract, I could solve this. But one of the sayings of Ethereum, like one of their core principles is the code is law. So with a regular legal contract, written up on paper by lawyers or whatever, it's left open to interpretation, like Kyle was saying. So if I believe that someone else has not completed their portion of the contract and therefore should not get paid, I either have to go to court or I have to go to a third party to say, hey, look, let's settle this dispute. They didn't pay, or they didn't do what they were supposed to do, so I'm not paying. With Ethereum, there is no need for lawyers. There is no need for third parties to assess whether or not the contract was complete. The contract is written in code, and when it's complete, the code will run, the money will be transferred, and that's the end of that. But this leaves open issues. Like if you write a contract, whatever's in that contract is what it is. So in this case, this attacker technically didn't do anything illegal, right? He utilized the contract as it was written, and therefore the code is law. So that was totally legal of him to do.
Yeah, we'll see how the I think right now both the DAO/Ethereum community is trying to figure out what they're going to do about this. Some of the points, I want to say it was Rob Graham who elegantly said it, like, hey, to a point, this thing is called, Ethereum. The whole point of this is being decentralized currency here, yet we're starting to see people who are proposing soft changes or hard changes, splits to the blockchain, which feel very much like regulation, what this is not supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, it's not supposed to be influenced or be able to be influenced by any outside party. Like, there shouldn't be anybody who can say, oh no, this transaction not valid, and it's gone. But I mean, just like with Bitcoin, essentially, there is always someone in control, right? Like, if in Bitcoin's case, if you can control 51% of the hashing power and maintain that control, you can do things like double spend. In this case, they're proposing, by they, I mean some of the people in charge of Ethereum and some of the founders of DAO are proposing what they've called a soft fork, where they're going to basically modify the software, the Ethereum software, so that the attacker can't withdraw their coins. And then they want all of the miners of Ethereum to then run this new updated version, which would keep the attacker from withdrawing their coins while they can further figure out essentially what they're going to do. Do you have any of the details on the hard fork?
I have some blogs that I can post in here. One of the things that we didn't mention when we first did our introduction here was this happened on the 17th. So we're talking about 4 days ago, June 17, 2016, that this went down. So there hasn't been a whole lot of time for essentially the organizers or even the hacker to figure out what's the next steps. One of the pieces that we glossed over was because of this implementation flaw where we allowed a user to essentially provide untrusted code to be able to do whatever he needed to do, which was the recursion bug that we talked about. And now that it's happened, there was some, essentially, I won't say mitigations, but he is not able or she is not able to withdraw or spend that ether. I want to say it's 30 days is built into the system. So
I believe it's 28 days.
Is it 28? Or either way, so we're talking about the clock ticking down now. The community only has a finite amount of time to figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to do it all at once. And how do they do it in a way that doesn't just bring down the DAO, but brings down a much larger organization, which is all of, Ethereum.
Right. All right. So let me say what I mean. I can probably show you what I mean when I talk about like a hard fork, or when someone talks about a hard fork, and what does that mean? So if we go back to this example of the blockchain, let's say that these blocks over here on this end, these are the attacker, basically. This is where the attacker transferred coins. So this area here is like right before the attack happened. So what a hard fork would do would be basically say, all these blocks over here on the right side, don't worry about those anymore. Those are now invalid. We create new blocks. We chain them back here to the parent. And then we build this new chain down here, essentially erasing the old history of what was happening up here. So this would go away. None of the miners would accept these blocks as valid. We would start a new chain. And effectively anything that happened up here in this chain at the top no longer means anything.
So Chris, how does this relate to, more than just of what, is happening here in the DAO? I can think of specifically times where companies heavily invested in technology in their organization, where due to what they implemented and the cost to be able to put this system in place, that they were forced to live with their decisions. Like, there was no option to just roll back time and say, hey, we can just make that issue go away. And I can specifically think of design flaws in protocols where you're now forced to make similar decisions of what these developers here are going to have to decide, whether they soft split or soft branch, whatever you want to call it, the changes that they make, or the essentially undo that they're trying to do with some of the hard fix as well. These are things that translate beyond just this blockchain instance.
Oh yeah. I mean, take for example the recent Swift attacks. right? So for anybody who's not familiar, Swift is like a back-end system that banks use to transfer money between banks and different things like that. And some attackers were able to get in and compromise a system and transfer out, what was it, like $1 billion from the Bangladeshi government or something. And some of that got caught, but basically what's happened is these banks are now like, okay, well, we have the systems installed that can transfer around enormous amounts of cash, and it's broken, and we're stuck with it. So they're really really afraid, and they're really putting a lot of pressure on the company behind Swift to say, like, you need to fix this now. But they're kind of stuck with what they have, at least for now.
Another point to drive home would be, we always talk about in the show, detection, early detection, mitigation, prevention. The actual draining of the DAO was caught promptly on the 17th. But the reality was there was not a structure that was put in place to be able to prevent this. So they literally watched their cash hour by hour, transaction by transaction, drain. And there was nothing anybody could do but blog about it. And even to this point, this hacker has the Ether. I'll post a screenshot in a little bit to their actual blockchain account that shows how much, according to the current blockchain, they have. It's like 3 million Ether.
Right.
And there is no undo.
Yeah, no. It basically their immediate reaction was they messaged all of the exchanges that would exchange Ether and said, "Oh my God, please halt trading on Ether at this point. Like, somebody's stolen our coin, our Ether. Like, what are we gonna do?" But it gets more interesting, right? Then after they proposed this soft fork, adjusting the software, the attackers came out and said, "Hey, look, we have, what is it, like 30 million Ether or something?"
I think it's 3, but yeah.
3 million Ether. And the attackers came out and said, "Hey, miners, look, if you don't update to this soft fork, we will share half of our Ether with you." So, it's like, I don't know, it's getting crazy.
So I'm now sharing here my screen, which is, one of the posts from the actual Ethereum team that is straight up saying, like, hey, we have found this attack. Notice it's published on June 17th. They knew who, not the actual person, but they know where the actual child DAO is that now holds the Ether. They acknowledge right away for at least 27 other days they will not be able to make any withdrawals. And now they're talking about the proposals. This is the type of reaction that, if I think about some of my friends that are CIOs, you better be on your toes for something like this. I think this was a great example of, they gave everything they knew. I'm clicking the URL right now to show, but here's the attacker. They know where it's at. If we look at his last transactions received, like, you can see one after another of 258 Ether, transferred away, and it goes on and on and on for hundreds of these things. So I think this is a neat point to, kind of hammer home that even though they had nothing to do, they're at least doing their best right now to keep the organization or keep the community up to date with saying, hey, this is the proposals. Here's the ways that miner pools should continue or keep doing what they're doing. Chris mentioned they went out to Twitter right away and said, hey, thou shall not make any transactions right now at these exchanges. I would like to say that despite the DAO not having some of that in place, it clearly looks like the Ethereum community had at least considered, what could go on and how this could go down. So,
yeah, and to make it worse, really, I guess 2 things. Number one, this bug was known about months ago. So the bug was fixed in one case, but they missed one case of it. There was a separate case where an attacker could cause recursion like that, and that was in this case in the split DAO function. So that's not great. I mean, I guess that's an idea of, like, what happens, I guess if you write software or you're a bug hunter or something and you find one bug, don't just assume that that's the only bug, right? There might be other ways to trigger the same functionality to get to the underlying code. So continue auditing and look for other places where you can trigger that. But number two, they can't really update the DAO very easily. So the way they have to update it is they have to modify the code, publish a new contract, and then submit a proposal to the original DAO to move all of the funds to the new DAO contract, and everyone has to vote on that. And then again, we're stuck at 7 days for that proposal to mature, and then 28 days after that before anybody can withdraw funds. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot in that there's no easy way to update a broken contract.
Well, one of the points that was just made in chat was, how is this different than regular money? And I think the point is, this same type of infrastructure that's in our current financial or global financial system is actually not much different than what was re-implemented in Ethereum or the DAO's implementation of smart contracts.
Yeah.
The difference is traditional cash, there's insurance. If there's such things for this digital currency right now? Can you insure your Ether or your Bitcoin?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not sure anybody would touch that because, like I said before, if you go by the Ethereum's guiding principle that the code is law, this is legal. That the contract allowed this to be done, therefore it is legal. This person did not steal. I mean, you might have a hard time arguing that in court because the intricacies of like the code and technical stuff, and the jury just might not understand these kind of things. But for technical folks, I mean, if you really go by the code is law, then this was totally legal and legit.
Yeah, it'll be wild to see how the code's intent versus the code's actual functionality will come in. And if something like this does go to court, which I'd be interesting, the user would have to actually come out and say, hey, it was me who compromised this.
Right.
And I'm going to take this argument to court. We'll see it, heaven forbid if it actually gets withheld or, held up that this guy did it correctly. I think it was Dino DeZovi who quickly, wrote about this and said in an elegant tweet, hey, lawyers will essentially become, or hackers will essentially become the lawyers of this financial, looking for loopholes or bugs in the code will be the equivalent towards, exploits in code will be the equivalent of loopholes in legal contracts.
New line of business, I think. I think you see a new job opening up for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this could be interesting.
Be a pretty good JD of cyber code, whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's look at what we usually talk about, right? We usually talk about malware authors and how they are trying to turn, their exploits and getting onto people's boxes into money, right? Right now it's turned into ransomware where they encrypt your files and say, if you want these back, get money, or they try to steal your banking creds or whatever, or, they try to steal your passwords to Amazon and order stuff and get it shipped somewhere else, right? It's difficult for them to turn a compromise into hard cash. In this case, a compromise is immediately cash.
All right, Chris, we're 40 minutes into this episode. I think we've hit most of our topics today, which was educating people about the DAO compromise. The exploit was slick. I said in the beginning it was a feature. I still believe it was a feature. But we'll definitely keep you guys up to date in our future episodes and the news. What happens if this is disclosed? For the next 28 days, we'll get to see what's going to, go down. And then from here on out, I guess this is maybe a very large foot stomp that says, hey, if you are writing code that is production ready, that either people are investing in or there's assets that are protected by this code, I mean, this is a strong, strong endorsement for auditing your code. I write buggy code, been writing code for years. I've never met anybody who doesn't write buggy code, especially the first iteration through there.
Yeah, I think even if you're not interested in Ethereum or the DAO, I think this has parallels to writing regular code in everyday systems, especially as more things start to connect to the internet, point of sale systems, power grid, all of that kind of stuff, right? Hacks are becoming more and more material, whereas before it was just like, yeah, you own my box. Now you can start to influence the real world.
All right, so Chris, I'm going to turn it over to the people on Twitter, the people on our Slack. Does anybody have any questions, or did we gloss over something that needed to be covered? I mean, Chris and I are far from perfect. I'm sure we'd worked all kinds of details up. This is 4 days we had to prepare to get on this, but I hope this educated you guys. I hope we drew enough parallels to talk about why this Tradecraft was important.
Yeah, do we have any other questions we haven't addressed?
Taking a look in chat room. Chat room is looking good. Look on the Twitterverse. Got a lot of thumbs up, Chris. Interesting concept. Never considered DAO Hack or Tradecraft this way, but I don't see any questions. So
cool. Well, I'm glad some people thought it was interesting. We try to bring interesting things here. We try to cover things that maybe are not so mainstream or whatever, and just kind of expose what attackers are doing, and hopefully you can find some way that benefits you, and that's really what we're trying to do.
All right, guys. Well, thank you again for joining us for another episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. Once again, I was Kyle Hansloven, and this guy here is Chris Bisnett, and we appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Later.